Sandman.
The 7 deadly sins are vices that can destroy the human soul and turn it away from the Lord. According to religious teachings, a newborn human being comes into the world pure and innocent. Growing up, he begins to gradually meet with earthly temptations and temptations that not everyone can resist. Many people commit bad deeds, the payback for which can be terrible. In this issue I will tell you about each of the 7 deadly sins according to Christianity. You will learn what danger they represent for the person and what essences are behind their sources, and also what it is necessary to do to get rid of earthly vices. The canonical list of 7 deadly sins was compiled in the 6th century by the Roman Pope Gregory the Great, on the basis of the work of the Greek monk theologian Evagrius of Pontus. The concept was further refined by the great philosopher-theologian Thomas Aquinas, who introduced a traditional system of human vices according to their depth and gravity. The most capacious definition of sin goes back to the New Testament and is defined as an act of violating God's commandments and the laws of Genesis established by the Almighty for people. The punishment for sins was shown by the Italian poet and thinker Dante Alighieri in his Divine Comedy. On the channel there is a video about the 9 circles of hell, in which I tell you what the souls of sinners go through in the underworld. Since ancient times, people have known about the 7 deadly sins, each of which is in charge of a certain demon. People have written about them legends and myths, which were subsequently passed down from generation to generation. Particular attention to the demons of sin and paid demonologists, devoted to otherworldly entities several works. Thanks to numerous studies and surviving grimoires, today the 7 major sins can be associated with the following demons. The most unforgivable and serious mortal sin according to the Bible is considered to be pride. It was because of her that God expelled Lucifer from the heavenly realm and punished him to superintend hell, as well as all sinners who fell into it after his death. Adam and Eve, who tasted the forbidden fruit in the Garden of Eden, paid for their pride and desire to rise above God. According to religious writings, pride is at the head of all mortal sins, because it can completely take over the mind and feelings. Proud man is in the captivity of his desires, cannot think rationally and strive with all his might to climb to the top of the pedestal in spite of others. Pride was often called the father of all 7 passions of man, as it was considered the most prominent trait of Lucifer. Being in this state, a person opposes himself to God, and also separates his spirit from him. It is important to distinguish between pride and arrogance. Constant opposition to everything and everyone dries up the soul of a person and turns his heart to stone. A proud person gradually becomes dead and incapable of love, friendship, and sincerity. The history of this mortal passion goes back thousands of years. Aristotle noted that arrogance is always carried out for its own satisfaction, so it carries a huge threat to society. In Christianity, pride is associated with Lucifer. Envy, like greed or lust, is characterized by an insatiable desire to have everything at once. Dissatisfaction with its own benefits acts quite destructive, because every day pushes and provokes people to commit disreputable acts. From envy are born petty treachery, sabotage, hurtful words, evil curses and other misdeeds. Possessing a person, envy can cause him greed, malice, aggression. The envious person lacks humility and gratitude to the Almighty for the given blessings. It was because of envy that Cain killed his brother Abel, to whom God approved the sacrifice. This sin can completely burn out the human soul, leaving only bitterness and anger on the wreckage of virtue. The sin of envy is correlated with the demon Leviathan. Negative character traits are inherent in every person. So much more important is not the emotion itself, but the consequences that it causes. Giving in to wrath, a person ceases to control himself and becomes truly terrible, and sometimes dangerous to the world around him. In its pure form, this quality is capable of generating bloody strife and age-old conflicts. To understand what human vice is, it is worth delving into biblical sources. God originally placed the feeling of wrath in the human heart as a symbol of all that is sinful and inappropriate. Over time, however, it became distorted and became a negative manifestation toward both neighbors and strangers. In rage, a person is unable to hear his opponent or turn to faith. Often wrath does not pass without a trace, because it sows resentment in a person, smoldering inside for a long time. Thus, the human spirit is plunged into darkness and desires only one thing: revenge and eternal torment of his offender or foe. Satan is at the root of the sin of wrath. Sloth or despondency is a whole set of concepts originating in ancient times. Despondency as a human vice includes mental, spiritual, physical, and pathological conditions. Staying in sloth, people lose all interest in life and stop making any effort to achieve the goals set earlier. In fact, the life of such a person turns into an ordinary existence and serving the time predestined on earth. In the clergy, despondency was associated with a disease that visited priests and God's servants, making them completely indifferent to their duties and service of the Most High. The main distinction of this sin is the lack of emotions and feelings of a person towards both himself and others. This results in boredom, anger, apathy, and lethargy of thought. The person becomes a true recluse and shields himself from everything going on around him. From a physical point of view, sloth has to do with the cessation of all labor or work, resulting in idleness and complete inactivity. Such neglect invariably causes stagnation of the spirit and also slows down one's progress towards eternal life and the Lord. Unlike other vices that are immoral traits, discouragement is the sin of unfulfilled obligations. The evil of discouragement is the absence of any feelings and emotions toward the world around us and others. Thus, man is alienated from his own self and God's plan, becoming a slave to idleness. In addition, sloth undermines both the physical and emotional shell, leading a person to spiritual ruin. According to the Christian faith, it is the demon Belphegor who induces man to sloth. The Church affirms that man's unhealthy desire for wealth and the accumulation of things is one of the worst mortal vices. The Italian philosopher and theologian Thomas Aquinas wrote that greed is a sin against the Creator himself because it causes people to give up the eternal for the temporal. Greed can cause robbery, theft, deception, manipulation, and other anti-Christian acts. Greedy people shamelessly refuse to help their neighbors, because money becomes the main value for them, overriding mercy, kindness and love. Quite often a greedy person is called a money grubber, as he literally withers over his good and thus ruins his soul. At the heart of such a sin as greed is the demon Mammon. Gluttony occupies a special place in the classification of 7 sins, because it is considered slavery to one's own stomach, bordering on wastefulness. In ancient times, gluttony was censured because overeating on the part of the wealthy could lead to the hungry and poor. In the Middle Ages, the meaning of this sin expanded somewhat. For example, Thomas Aquinas believed that gluttony could include an overly compulsive expectation of food, inappropriate pickiness in eating, and an excessive preoccupation with delicacies and expensive dishes. The theologian identified several forms of gluttony. The most serious form of gluttony is considered to be the overly greedy use of food because it is expressed in an addiction to simple and base pleasures that provoke a person to reduce his life goals to food and drink. The episode when Esau sold his firstborn for a lentil stew is a striking example of this sin. When the human spirit succumbs to greed, it becomes possessed by the demon Beelzebub. Lasciviousness and lust have nothing to do with God's original design for the family and the procreation of children. Lust is often associated with strong or unbridled sexual desire, which leads to adultery and various forms of perversion. Lust is a singular carnal sin, not a spiritual sin. Although voluptuousness is a bodily passion, its origins lie in the realm of the mind and imagination. Often voluptuousness is born out of a person's fantasies and thoughts, gradually taking on a physical shell. For many, this mortal vice does not result in happiness, but in suffering and pain. Sometimes to voluptuousness researchers include unjustified jealousy. Giving into passion, a man gives his soul in possession of a demon such as Asmodeus. All demons try to tempt a person and lure him to their side. The sinful soul remains forever imprisoned by Lucifer or some other otherworldly entity and has to spend eternity in hell, working out the punishment. According to demonology and religious writings, as well as Dante's Divine Comedy, the underworld consists of 9 circles, on each of which the souls of people serving punishment for certain mortal sins. It is possible to escape punishment for sins committed only if a person sincerely repents of his vices and begins to wage an internal struggle with demons. God is always merciful to people, so is able to forgive even the worst and gravest sin. It is possible to resist earthly trials only through one's own will and innate feelings. It is especially difficult to fight vices in the modern world, where at every step a person can face envy, anger, greed, lust and other temptations. People who have realized what mortal sins are and what they threaten, must go deep into their inner world and begin to confront them.